Thanks for sticking around. I think we're good to go. First of all, I'm Alex Lakatos. I do a bunch of things in this world. I help Mozilla. I volunteer for Mozilla. I'm a representative mentor, which is basically I help them build community worldwide. And I'm also one of the tech speakers. That means I help our local contributors to get better at public speaking, especially in front of a tech audience. And instead of us having to fly halfway around the world to do a meetup, they could do that. I do like the idea of having a paycheck and getting paid. So I work at Nexmo as a JavaScript developer advocate. Anyone here heard about Nexmo before? Okay, quite a few, that's cool. For the rest of you, Nexmo do cloud communications API. They have like an API to send and receive SMSs, make voice calls, create chat application or in-app voice and stuff like that. I'm not gonna talk about that. What I wanna talk about tonight is a world without JavaScript. And there's a reason why I want to talk about this. So I think about 2 months ago, I've met Cheryl at one of the many, many London events. And she gave me a challenge. She said, okay, you're a JavaScript engineer. What happens if there's no JavaScript? I was like, well, the browser wars weren't bloody. What do you mean? And then I started looking at it. It was like, what if the browser wars actually ended and JavaScript was gone from this world, JavaScript was forbidden. And when I first started looking into this, the very first page I saw said, when you have eliminated JavaScript, whatever remains must be an empty page. And I kind of freaked out. I was like, there's no world without JavaScript. What do you mean? And this is Google Maps, by the way. And if you go and disable JavaScript, so what I did for most of this is I went and disabled JavaScript completely out of my browser, and I tried to see if there's some hope. Google Maps says there isn't, and there are big fat liars, by the way. And I went on Alexa's top 50 websites, and I started going through them one by one, trying to see which one works, how good they work, rating them of sorts, and then for those who actually work, because apparently there are a few that work, seeing what makes them tick, what makes them work, how there's a world without JavaScript, how does this world look like. If I went onto Facebook and Facebook shows this pop-up that says, oh, you don't have JavaScript installed, but here's this whatever legacy mobile optimized version of Facebook. I was like, yeah, cool, let's see how it works. And this is how it looks. So on my laptop, which is a 13-inch laptop, it has no idea of responsiveness or otherwise. Even though responsiveness is a CSS feature, and I still have CSS. And it looks like Facebook used to look, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago? 7 maybe? You can scroll through posts and stuff like that. If you try to interact, like if you're at the bottom of the page and you click like, you get a page reload without knowing where you were left and stuff like that. If you try to post, there's no rich posting experience, there's basically text. I was like, okay, this is the second most popular, because the first most popular site in there, which is Google, actually works perfectly fine without JavaScript, except it has no autocomplete. That's the only feature that's missing from Google, autocomplete. Otherwise, works perfectly fine. The second one was Facebook, and this gave me hope. I was like, okay, the top 2 work. So it must be okay, like people thought about this. Because there's a lot of people out there who actually do disable JavaScript. And then I started hitting a bunch of duds. Mostly YouTube, for example, which shows you, so what I thought was they were showing elements in there that weren't being populated. No, it's just a background image. At least the background image has some sort of branding and I can figure out it's YouTube. And I was like, well, there's a bunch of sites that handle video in there. I was like, well, you're not gonna look at every one of them, just see what makes them tick. And I looked at most video streaming websites in there. Now, the only problem was some of the video streaming websites in there are actually porn related. And I had to have an interesting conversation with my IT department to whitelist Pornhub on my computer, because I needed it as research for a talk. A week later, my manager actually looking on the website and seeing that I speak about the world without JavaScript, I now have Pornhub enabled and my laptop goes missing from my desk from time to time. The next one up there was Wikipedia, and it was this whole thing in which I actually clicked disable JavaScript and enable JavaScript a couple of times until I figured out Wikipedia works just the same without JavaScript. There's no visual indicator that there's no JavaScript on the page. And when I looked behind the scene at Wikipedia, they only do some minor stuff in JavaScript, like their JavaScript is under 50 kilobytes of JavaScript. There's no outside framework, they mostly do some sort of tracking, and when you go in edit mode, you get a richer contextual experience. But on the actual page of Wikipedia, consuming Wikipedia, not creating Wikipedia, there's no difference with or without JavaScript. Of course, there's a few exotic websites in there like WQ, which apparently is an e-commerce platform from Asia. It's not exactly working. It's showing something, placeholders and some text. And if I knew any, I'm guessing that's Japanese. I'm guessing, I have no idea. But if I knew the language, probably I would understand something from it. But this is a whole new class of things. So I looked at video things because it's a class of video rendering sites or video streaming. And then there's the e-commerce platforms. And I was like, well, you need to have a card. There's a lot of interactivity with an e-commerce site. Obviously, if video doesn't work, e-commerce isn't going to work. And then I stumbled upon Amazon. And this one is the one that impressed me the most. It's not as pretty as with JavaScript. It's actually working, not pretty, but working. And actually I have a few friends at Amazon, and I reached out. I was like, why can I order a product on Amazon without JavaScript? And we went into this lengthy conversation, but to cut a long story short is, they had to invest a lot of time and money and dig up some, well, ancient knowledge to make this work without JavaScript, because they used to have the old versions of Kindle, and the old versions of Kindle came with an internet connection, an always-on internet connection, and the web, except it couldn't run JavaScript, so they had to make everything, like if you wanted to buy a book from the Kindle, even today when you buy a book from the Kindle, you don't have JavaScript in the experience baked anywhere, but you can still buy the book. And I think this is the biggest website I've seen, like Wikipedia aside, which is basically an encyclopedia, and it's like information you consume. It's not really interactive or a web app or any type of modern thing you think about when you build JavaScript. Amazon actually works without it. And later on in the talk, I'm going to actually tell you how it works behind the scene, because I spent with my friends from Amazon, I think we spent like 2 weeks going back and forth over emails, trying to find someone who actually worked on this and maintains this version of it, and to figure out how it works exactly. I went on through to another social media platform, which is Twitter. And Twitter is built with modern tools, and I'm proud that they do that. I'm impressed they do that. And it fares far better than Facebook. So you have the same prompt saying, hey, you don't have JavaScript, do you want the legacy version of Twitter? But if you look behind, they actually start rendering the page, because they're using server-side rendering for the first server of the page. And that loads without JavaScript, because just the server takes all the JavaScript, does all the interactive shit. Pardon my French. And then it serves that up for a really fast first load. And then JavaScript gets loaded, and that takes over the page. But you see the first page without JavaScript. And I wanted to see what the legacy Twitter client looked like. I looked at Facebook, and Facebook was honestly horrible. And Twitter isn't faring better in terms of responsiveness. By the way, the mobile-friendly version of Facebook was amp.facebook.com instead of facebook.com. This actually still loads on Twitter, just with a post option at the end of it. And it's what they used to have before they started doing their PWA web page. Now everything works fast because it's just pure HTML and CSS. Because it's pure HTML and CSS, when you click favorite, for example, or something like that, the page loads. This one actually has all the anchor tags and semantic HTML behind, so the browser can figure out what element you were at before, and scrolling happens and a bunch of different things. I was like, okay, so social websites are actually faring better than anything else, because, I don't know, they've been around for a while, they want all the interaction, they've got something that kind of works, and they're keeping that. And then I stumbled upon this beauty, which is basically a blank sort of white page. Can you figure out which social media is that? Which social platform is that?
Instagram?
Yep. You've got it. That's Instagram. Instagram loads a sort of kind of blank page. And then I started looking behind Instagram to see what they're doing. And it turns out they use a modern JavaScript framework. I'm not going to say which one. You guys figure it out. But they use one of the modern frameworks. They just didn't bother to invest in server-side rendering. So the first time they serve you the page, they serve you the massive, massive JavaScript framework and an empty element. It's an empty body element that has a tag that gets overwritten by the JavaScript framework. But because JavaScript doesn't happen on that page, nothing happens on that page. It doesn't even have, like, the most confusing thing ever is, at least YouTube had some branding so you could figure out what page you were on. This one has no branding. Because, for example, if I open it up in my Kindle, the URL bar is not visible from first load. So it's a blank page, you have to kind of figure it out. And I was like, okay. But then I stumbled upon one of the video websites which looked promising. Like, compared to everything else, it had images, because the way YouTube works is they generate an image based on the video, which gets put as the cover and loaded first, and then the video is hidden behind the image. But because they don't have JavaScript, they don't even bother with that. But Netflix/browse, so you could log into Netflix just fine without JavaScript. And then on the browse page, it actually knew it was me. It knew what I watched, what were the new releases. It actually showed where I was with my previous movies. I was like, okay, so someone actually decided to use HTML5 video because HTML5 video actually works for video streaming. And they got all excited. I was like, okay, so I can watch Netflix without JavaScript. And then as soon as I clicked one of the movies, it went to a dark page. It was like to a black page. Not even branding, not even nothing. I was looking at one of the articles online about Netflix, and someone else tried the Netflix experience. They used to have like a logo in one of the corners. They got rid of that. And I tried to, like, the network engineering team is one of the best engineering teams around. A lot of people actually give back to the open source community, and I always thought, okay, so you guys are the ones who are going to invest, because if you think about it, there's some time commitment to invest into a world without JavaScript. I was like, you guys probably have invested into that. And I reached out to a former Netflix engineer. I don't happen to know anyone who still works for them, who works for Google now. And I was like, why don't you guys do video or HTML5 video? Because that's supposed streaming and all the nice and fancy things, stuff like that, without JavaScript out of the box. And his main response was basically because with HTML5, only a few browsers signed the DRM agreement. And it turns out if they can't be sure about DRM, they're not going to bother at all. The player they're using is a proprietary one built for them with the DRM package inside and stuff like that. And I guess this is yet another way we got screwed by SOPA and PIPA in the long run. The last website I kind of looked at was Imager. And when I loaded the first page, everything worked. I could see the images, I could do a new post. It looked like Imager was the same thing. I was like, okay, so I looked at Reddit previously, and the only feature of Reddit that didn't work was the upvote, downvote, but everything else worked fine. I was like, okay, because Imager and Reddit kind of appeared on the internet around the same time, they're really old, they have the same concepts of old school HTML, CSS, old school looking websites. I was like, okay, this is really interesting. And then I found out their team actually started changing over the past couple of years, and their inside pages or their post pages and stuff like that have been completely rewritten with JavaScript frameworks and all the nice bells and whistles. And the home page is the only one who has been rewritten because it has to be fast. The first page has to load fast, so it's pure HTML and CSS. And I was like, okay, there's actually some websites which function really well, or some websites which you can't even figure out the difference between JavaScript and no JavaScript. And I figured, okay, there is hope. There's hope in a world without JavaScript. And when I looked at how the world is built, as basically pure HTML and CSS, and that's a given, because mainly JavaScript came after HTML and CSS. When the first browser worked, it was text-based, it understood HTML and CSS, and it wasn't really a visual interface. It was a bunch of command-line things that parsed all that. And JavaScript wasn't even the first web language. Microsoft had one before Mozilla came up with JavaScript, so it works without it, HTML and CSS. You're safe with that. And then I figured all the server-side operability or interoperability happens with post requests with forms or get requests via links. That means whenever you click the little heart icon on Twitter, you actually load the new page or send a post request saying, I clicked on this. And there's no fancy things like put or delete or options or any of that kind. At least I haven't spied, like I used to open up all those pages in the network inspector trying to see what happens behind the scenes, and I haven't seen a single put request, even when I try to update my user. This still happens via post. So I looked at the way code was built, like HTML was built, and they basically used semantic HTML instead of having a bunch of different divs with CSS and a bunch of JavaScript that makes it act like a button or something else. It's just basically semantic HTML, because HTML is actually powerful when you use the tags for what they were meant, not just divs everywhere. Some of them have some sort of dynamicity, not necessarily interactivity with CSS and CSS animations and stuff like that, and those still work on the web. When you want to do programmable animations, well, you're shit out of luck. And some of them out there, not the fancy ones, not the top 50, some of them who have their own MP4 or proprietary videos work with a video tag, as most people will put a video tag before they'll put a YouTube object, because YouTube still has branding. And so that means most of the corporate, I hate to tell you, most of the corporate websites out there still work without JavaScript, which is fine. And I was like, okay, so there's some sort of world without JavaScript. The whole apocalypse came. But is it worth living a world without JavaScript? It's like, is it worth it? And when I thought about, because I spent probably the better part of a week playing around with websites or trying to actually use websites without JavaScript. And after about a week, I started tallying the pros and cons. Honestly, when I started this, I didn't actually think there were going to be any pros to this exercise in futility. But it turns out there's actually a few pros. There's no ads on most pages. I think the only page that had an ad is Facebook's self-served ads, because they make their own ads, they serve their own ads. They look horrible and you wouldn't click them, but they still serve with a page. But most of the web, because ads get loaded via JavaScript from Google, they have no ads. There's no more endless scroll, and I thank God for that. But that does mean that the Facebook page that loads has like 400 different posts on the load. There's a good part about that, because it's only HTML and CSS. It loads in under a second, but it's extremely, extremely long. But there's no more endless scrolling animation. There's no more models begging for attention to subscribe to their newsletter, to share this on Twitter, to share this on Facebook, to have a discount, whatever. There's no more models on the web, because they use JavaScript to actually pop up. And if it's a regular pop-up blocker, I haven't actually seen anyone doing a regular pop-up blocker because of the pop-up blockers. There's no tracking. Well, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. There's some sort of tracking. So I've seen a few websites do this thing called pixel tracking, where they'll have a 1 pixel image, a blank 1 pixel image, that goes to a URL with a post request at the end, which says something, and they'll track you for that. And you can see that someone visited the page, but you can't see what clicks I made, that I scrolled, how long I stayed on your page. There's no user activity tracking anymore. There's just visits, which in my book, that's fine with me. Because it's HTML and CSS, and usually it ends up being under 200 kilobytes. Like Facebook was the biggest page I've loaded without JavaScript. The load time is impressive. It happens instantly. AMP, what AMP? It's like, nope. Because it doesn't do JavaScript, so the JavaScript engine doesn't actually have anything to run or to mess up, the performance goes through the roof. there's no lag, there's no jitter, there's no, oh, my mouse is beach balling over and over again because this page is trying to run a slideshow for me. Nope, none of that shit. And I came to think about like sitting in the audience and hearing these people talk about AMP and PWAs and stuff like that. I kind of figured, well, AMPs are a slightly more expensive version of HTML and CSS because it gets JavaScript to interpret them. PWAs are a way to run JavaScript off for progressive web apps. And I thought about the whole progressive terms. Like, well, you have to have a really good web app or web page before you can make it a web app and then progressive. So I think you guys should try an exercise of just building something without JavaScript. I know I'm a JavaScript dev. I know what I'm asking for. I'm a JavaScript dev, not reformed. I'm an addict, but I actually built something with JavaScript. It's gonna be on my website as the main page starting in, well, I deployed when I left, Heroku was down, so probably tomorrow. But I built my whole front page without JavaScript. To be honest, it wasn't a big page or anything. I couldn't see the difference. I just removed any JavaScript in there, but it still works. And with that, I thank you.